Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Matt Rhule, the Nebraska Cornhuskers close out a class that we hopped on a couple days ago and said, this one feels like it could be special. Obviously, headlined by Dylan Raiola, but I want to kind of take a deeper dive into this Nebraska class coming in 2024 and some of the pieces that we really like. And the first thing that stands out, a couple things that stand out. One, you dominate the quarterback position, obviously landing two very, very high quality quarterbacks. You dominate the state of Nebraska on the high school recruiting trail, and you're getting those guys on the offensive line. This is I think in a perfect world, this is the kind of class Matt Rhule wants to bring in every single recruiting cycle. Really good job by Matt Rhule. Going to dive into it. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. The Nebraska fans, you guys have shown a ton of love. We've obviously loved talking about this program. Can't thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And more importantly, would love to hear from you guys in terms of what players are firing you up in this 2024 class. Dill, going to kick this one off to you. Nebraska's 2024 class. It's signed. How we feeling?
Yeah, and obviously the big thing is having that cornerstone piece. Because, again, you kind of mentioned, like, for the most part, this class does look really good. I think the one thing you're probably looking for is a little bit more of that real top-end skill. And I think when you have a quarterback, it becomes easier to sell that, especially if Dylan Raiola has a good start to his career.
Yeah, when you have that quarterback, it starts getting easy. One, to recruit that 2025 and 2026 class. Hey, top-end wide receivers. We got one of the top quarterbacks in the country throwing you the football. And then in the transfer portal, it gets very easy to address the wide receiver position in the transfer portal as well, starting with the quarterback room. And again, this is probably the most popular national media narrative, so we won't spend too much time on it, but it's really important to nail the quarterback position. Nebraska fans know more than anybody from that 2023 year how important quarterback play is to winning football games. Dylan Raiola gets all the attention. I do want to give a quick shout out to Danny Kaelin. This is a guy that he's been through a lot in this recruiting process. He wants to be a Nebraska Cornhusker. He's coming in with this class, and I can't speak enough about the maturity of someone like Kaelin in an era of college football where you don't see that very often. The fact that Danny Kaelin staying in this class, which he largely was really responsible in building, there's not going to be a bigger Danny Kaelin fan than yours truly. And Nebraska got a good problem on their hands. You got two really young, really talented quarterbacks coming in. The quarterback position and the future of that position looking very bright for Matt Rhule and the staff.
And frankly, I think aside from just the talent part, you needed that depth. You needed guys to be able to push each other. Because frankly, if Dylan Raiola comes into this room as the only new quarterback they bring in, he's QB1 by default. He really doesn't need to earn it. There's nobody on this roster, if you're looking at from last year, that's even really able to challenge him or that you could even make an argument for, because it was so bad. So to bring in another guy who's going to push him, I just think that adds the competition I think you need. Because you look at some of these teams that have those roster spots or depth chart spots that are starter by detail, those positions don't typically work out. When you have a really deep room and a lot of competition, that's when you get the best results. So to be able to keep Danny Kaelin in this class, and maybe he competes for 2-3 years, and if Dylan Raiola turns out to be the guy and leaves early, you might have Danny Kaelin playing very meaningful snaps for this Nebraska team.
And we've seen programs like Georgia ride with guys who are lower rated, right? Brock Vandegrift, 5-star at Georgia, ends up transferring out because he loses the job to the 4-star Carson Beck. So it's a good problem to have. It's a problem that's been solved for Nebraska. Now, do you still maybe want to add a experienced quarterback in the portal? We'll see if they do that. But if you're a Nebraska fan, you're looking at the future of this program, and we know it wasn't a 1-2 year thing. You got to give Matt Rhule time to cook. He's absolutely cooking, and the quarterback room looks very bright. Second thing I have, taking my notes on the Nebraska class here. Second thing, Dill, we're back to dominating the state of Nebraska, right? The best players at Nebraska, they come to Lincoln and play their football for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Obviously headlined by Carter Nelson. It is great to see Nebraska getting that top talent in state to stay home. That's probably my second biggest takeaway here.
Yeah, and that's always important for your flagship state school. If you're that type of school, you really should get every kid from that area. And not even to mention go out and be able to go kind of clean up Iowa as well. Because that's frankly, if you're Nebraska, it's not necessarily enough talent within that state, but you want to be able to dominate the Midwest states around Nebraska and be able to go into Iowa and kind of be the team to beat rather than letting those kids go to Iowa, for example.
And we talk about regional. I mean, Nebraska is not just recruiting the Midwest. I mean, they went down to Southwest Florida. We're going to talk about a few late additions to this class, flipping a guy from the Miami Hurricanes. You go down to the state of Texas and grab a bunch of guys that had offers from the Longhorns and the Aggies. Like, it's not just recruiting Nebraska. You want to make sure you're cleaning up there, but going into a talent-rich place like Texas and Southwest Florida, that's what's kind of stood out to me. Now, the next thing I have in my notebook, and this is probably one of the more important things that probably not going to get talked about enough, Dale, getting those offensive line, those big bodies in there. Grant Brix, one of the more sought-after offensive linemen. You go head-to-head with a program like Oklahoma and win out for one of the premier offensive linemen in this class. Preston Taumua, a guy that missed his year in 2023 to a torn ACL, but you had to battle the Oregon Ducks, the premier West Coast program, if you will, for a kid out in Hawaii. I mean, seeing them win recruiting battles for top offensive linemen, that's another thing that if you're Nebraska, we got to see that replicated, and it's really nice to see Matt Rhule's first full cycle. He's getting it done along the trenches.
Yeah, because honestly, like, I know Dylan Raiola is great, but at the end of the day, if you can't protect guys and you can't play decent up front, nothing else matters. So
and you got to run the football. Like, the best friend for a young quarterback is running the football. And this is Matt Rhule. Sorry to cut you off. Matt Rhule said it time and time again in his press conference. We want to run the football. We want to run 75 yards in the fourth quarter. Preston Taumua, Grant Brix, they are going to help you do that.
And that, frankly, is like when you look at Nebraska, Iowa, some of these Midwest states that they really should be able to dominate, the best players out of those areas come out as offensive linemen. They're going to want to see guys go to the league. Grant Brix, Preston Taumua, like those guys are NFL talents. And if they really develop well at Nebraska, then you start seeing like that sort of pipeline where it's like, oh man, I'm a really good offensive lineman in the Midwest. Well, Nebraska's choice one, and it has to be choice one if Matt Rhule is going to be really good here.
Yep. The third thing I have, I think this is my fourth thing. I've lost count, got my notes all over the place, is the developmental prospects. And that's something that Matt Rhule, that's where he's going to make his living. Like, if his tenure, which I think it's going to works out in Lincoln, it's because he finds these diamonds in the rough. He developed. You look at his time at Baylor, those recruiting classes weren't good according to 24/7 Sports. Matt Rhule is very good at identifying those kind of diamond in the rough guys, getting them into the program, developing them. I don't think there's a better example of this, and it's kind of littered with guys like that. But I'm going to go down to a guy that got added to the class today, and Amari Sanders, coming from Miami, Florida. So again, you got that Miami, Southwest Florida pipeline. Amari Sanders, doing some digging into him. He's a guy that hasn't played his first snap of football his first snap of football, I should say, came in 2022. This guy was a former hooper, former basketball player. And for him to rise to a 3-star, having 12 months of football under his belt, one, that tells you the caliber of athlete he is. That secondly tells you the ceiling. Like, this is a 3-star for a reason, because he's not the best football player at the high school level yet, because he's only been playing for a little bit. But to tell you he's a 3-star, what's that ceiling like when he plays football for 4 or 5 more years? Those kind of guys are Matt Rhule guys, and going to be a backbone staple of Nebraska recruiting classes.
And you just look across it. I mean, you got a guy like Braylon Pruitt as a 6'4", 190-pound linebacker. I mean, if you develop that type of frame, that's like the type of athlete that can play really, really good football. You even look further at a guy like Quinn Clark. Like, yeah, Montana, it doesn't matter how good you play in Montana. Nobody's going to take notice of it because it's Montana. But you got a guy like him who's 6'5" and really good athlete. It's interesting because there are a bunch of those guys who, again, like haven't proved it on the field, obviously, and maybe just haven't had the chance to prove it on the field, but have the athleticism, the talent to be those guys. And again, Matt Rhule, we've talked about it. He's a developer. That's where he's made his hay. If he can take those guys and make them stand out, I think, frankly, that's like what I think will put him in more of a position to land some of those real top-end guys, which, again, I don't want to be up here and saying that's the stars don't matter guy. You need to be able to recruit and go win those big-time battles for those top 100 kids. But I think the first step for that, when you're a program like Nebraska that's kind of been down for a little while, is showing you can put guys in the league. So he's going to need to do a really, really great job with some of these high potential athletes in developing them and putting them in the NFL.
And many people know, like, I am a massive fan of Matt Rhule. I listen to pretty much any interview I can get my hands on. He talks about his time at Temple and talks about his time at Baylor. And he mentions certain players, you know, those guys that were overlooked in high school, and they bring him into Temple, they bring him into Baylor. I think Reddick for the Eagles was one of those guys he mentioned came to Temple and was a guy that no one was giving Power 5 looks to. You get him in the program. He's one of the best edge rushers you see in the NFL. Terrell Bernard, the linebacker for my Buffalo Bills, a guy that was a 2-star coming out of high school, and they still had 2-star ratings. Guys that weren't getting looked at by Texas and Texas A&M, gets to the program, day 2 pick. Like that, he has a proven track record of doing this. His talent identification and player development is absolutely spot on. Really excited to see a guy like Amari Sanders or a guy like Vincent Shavers kind of develop into maybe some of those diamond in the roughs that Matt Rhule has identified. And Dill, the last thing I want to talk about, that again, in such a busy day, in such a news cycle where it's full of like Dylan Raiola getting his NLI kind of sent in, Bly Hill coming over from St. Francis in Pennsylvania, the FCS level. Now, did not get any filming on Bly Hill. Can't find St. Francis football film. That being said, looking at some numbers provided to you by PFF, faced 40 targets as true freshman year, only gave up 17 catches. 42% completion percentage when targeted. You can't lie with those numbers. 6 forced incompletions, 2 interceptions. The thing I'm circling, man, he's 6'3". Like that's what you want your quarterback.
Well, I was going to say that's like the prototype of what he's done is these underdeveloped, physically underdeveloped guys, like light for their position but athletic, have certain traits, that length, that's whatever they're looking for, and see what you can do with them. Because you're right, it's unique to have 6'3" cornerbacks who can move the way they need to move to play at that high of a level. So Matt Rhule, I trust that he's seen something, and I'm very interested to see what he can do with them.
I wonder how that was. It like, does he have a guy at Temple in that Pennsylvania range where he's like, gives Matt Rhule a call one night and say, hey, by hell, St. Francis Academy, Power 5 programs ain't going to be on him. Take a look at him. And then that's such a Matt Rhule. And like, you're looking for like, oh, Princely U coming over to Nebraska in the transfer portal. No, Nebraska, Matt Rhule, you're going to go to the FCS ranks and get a guy that is balling out as a true freshman. Bly Hill, really excited to see what he can do. If you're a Nebraska fan, like very successful, low stress signing day, right? All the guys that were verbally committed, they signed the papers. They're heading to Nebraska. You add a few other guys. Really successful day. Nebraska fans have a ton to be excited for. The boys are pumped up again. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Had to hop on, give you guys some of our takes on this Nebraska class. Appreciate y'all, and we'll talk to you guys later.